Any question about anything? Awesome. Okay, here we go. Here we go. I do have one question for you guys. Let me share my screen here real quick. I need to make this a little bit larger. Hang on, sorry. Um, did we talk about this already?
I don't think so.
Does this look familiar? Okay. I
Mm-mm.
didn't think we did, but I wanted to hit this up. And this is what I was going to talk about last week. So kind of goes with what we were doing last week in terms of like the intake and deciding if you need to do an assessment or not. I'm going to talk. I'm going to do about a 20-minute kind of lecture on a couple of different things. I'll put these slides up so you can see them. So I'm going to kind of go through them a little bit quick. You don't worry about writing every single thing down. Of course, you can take screenshots of it if you want. You can save it that way. But when you're thinking about choosing an assessment, any kind of instrument, or thinking about strategies when you're assessing clients, one of the things you need to do is you need to figure out, what you're looking for, like what kind of information do you need. Like, for example, if someone's coming to you as a couple and they're wanting to look at, strengthen their marriage, and with what everyone says communication, there's specific couples assessments that you can give couples that will assess various different aspects of their relationship. The same is true for any type of mental health disorder. The same is true for intelligence testing, personality testing, aptitude testing. There's lots of different ways to do assessments in different areas. If there's something that you can't personally give, like as master students, you wouldn't be able to diagnose ADHD, for example. But that's something that you're like, hey, like, and you meet with them, and as you talk with them, you're like, you meet some of these guidelines for ADHD. Hey, let's get you in with a neuropsychologist or someone that can diagnose you if that's what it is. If that's not what it is, that's fine. But that's a strategy too. So being open to what needs to be assessed. Um, you in terms of analyzing, you kind of do that throughout the whole process. There's been many times that I've met with clients and we started out talking about certain things they want to talk about, and as we keep going, certain things kind of come to the surface, and I'm thinking, man, you seem to reach some criteria for these types of disorders over here. I think maybe we need to test for that. Let's do some assessments for that. I'll give you an example. I had a teenager, senior last year that I was working with for about 6 or 8 months, and he obviously had depressive symptoms. I gave him a depression inventory. He matched the criteria. We got him in with the doctor, got him some meds. He was doing better for a while. And then the summer hit and quarantine hit, and we stopped meeting. And his mom reached out to me about 3 months ago, and he had gone to college, and all of a sudden stopped going to class, and they didn't even know what was going on until a family member was like, "Hey, you really need to look at his social media. He's posting some things that are just off." And he was able to get in with a good psychologist, and come to find out he actually had bipolar 2 disorder, which was good to know. But that's not anything I would have probably picked up on as we were meeting. But it's something that, with the current symptoms that I had, but as he kind of disappeared. He would be gone for a while, and then he would be around for a while. As that was happening, they were able to get a good diagnosis, and he's doing a lot better now. But the reason why I'm saying that is because the strategy that I was using with him was, he already was diagnosed with ADHD. He definitely had depression, and so that's kind of what we were working on. But at some level, you got to be able to say, wait a minute, something else is happening. Let's figure it out. I've got a 21-year-old guy that I've been working with for a few months now, and some things just haven't been adding up lately. And I actually referred him to get kind of a whole battery of testing done, and that's actually going to help us in our work because he's been diagnosed with OCD and probably ADHD, and those are kind of the things I was thinking that was happening, and so that's going to actually help our sessions more. So being able to get the information that's available, but also like if you need more information, that's where assessments can really help. That's where it can really help you understand the things that are going on and how to help people more specifically. Okay. There's formal, obviously, and informal techniques. Informal techniques is kind of what Wendy and I were doing last time. I was just kind of asking questions. We're kind of going through kind of an unstructured interview of sorts. But if you wanted to be more formal, a lot of even some of the clinics that I've worked for or worked with have like a whole battery of assessments that they give new clients in their intake, and that's just part of their protocol to give those to people. When I was in my master's program, we gave about an hour's worth of assessments to every single client that came in. And then we would be responsible for scoring all those and then giving the results to the client the next week that they came in. That's just something we did as protocol. You can do that even as a solo practitioner or in various clinics. Obviously, the more higher level care you go, like if any of you guys were like end up working, let's say at a treatment facility or even like a Mesa Springs or Carrollton Springs, where you might treat some more high level mental health disorders. The higher level you go, the more assessments you give. And there's a reason why. It's because you're basically trying to narrow down into what's going on. You're trying to either, get rid of some diagnosis and really hone in on what's actually happening. Okay. So anytime we're evaluating assessments, and this is partly why I give this assignment that I'm giving, you're looking at what the purpose is of the assessment, how it was developed. Is it appropriate for the group that you're trying to give this to or the person you're giving it to? We've talked about this a lot. Is it reliable? Is it valid? All those things are important. When you think about interpreting it and scoring it, that's the reason why I want you to list those things, because you have to score it and you have to make some interpretation of the results by scoring it. Most of the assessments have gotten, the ones that most clinicians use have gotten really good at making the scoring and the interpretation fairly easy. But there are some assessments that are a little more involved. Like for instance, if you get into the marital and family world and you're working a lot with marriages and families, you start to use some assessments with them. Those are a little more complex because there's more people involved. So a lot of times there'll also be a manual that will come with those particular assessments that talk to you about how to score them and what certain scores mean. If any of you go into the child world and you want to do play therapy, and let's say you want to do like sand tray, you can learn and become certified in sand tray therapy. There's some particular types of objects that are used by certain clients that mean certain things. That's something you can learn more about. That's a little more that training is a little more intensive than, let's say, the Beck Depression Inventory, which is basically giving someone that inventory. They mark some numbers, you add the score up, and then you're looking at ranges of scores that tell you if there's, no depression, minimal, moderate, or severe. And so there's various levels of, in terms of like how hard it is to give, score, and interpret assessments. And we're going to talk about some of those specifically, not the next class. We'll start talking about those because we're going to jump right into personality and intelligence testing. just kind of being familiar with how things are administered. You want to read the instructions yourself so you can tell them. That is part of trying to make sure there's not as many errors for the client. You want to make sure that you tell them, hey, this is how you, you know, it's a Likert scale between 1 and 5. You pick, you know, you're just circling a number or you're writing a number. Um, you need to be super familiar with the actual testing materials, and you need to be familiar with how they're scored. Of course, there's hand scoring, computer scoring. A lot of assessments are going online now, going electronic. Even when I first started teaching this class about 6 years ago, there's so many more assessments that are online now. I think Dr. Armstrong can do almost all of his assessments, his psychological assessments online now. I think there might be one or two he can't. So most everything can be online, which is really nice because it gives you a score really quickly, which is kind of nice. Sometimes when you score things, you're looking at like certain like especially if it's numbers, like it could give you a range of numbers and that range means X, and another range of numbers means Y, and you're looking at people kind of on a continuum. Hey, you fall within this range, so you might have it sounds like you have some moderate depressive symptoms, and that might mean you're barely in the clinical range of depression, let's say. Uh, the same is true now when we talk about the autism spectrum. It's no longer looking at like, hey, this is what you have. It's like you're on this spectrum of autistic symptoms and behaviors that coincide with that, which I think is a lot more healthy. I think they did a good job with that. There's some they didn't do a great job with, I don't think, but that one they did. When we talk about communicating results, I think Wendy asked this question last week about the Hearth Hope. I'm going to give that assessment to you guys in groups, and you're going to take it, score it, and then give results to each other. We're going to practice that because giving results, communicating results is super important. You always want to do it tentatively, but assertively. So, Chris, what in the heck does that mean? Well, what that means is you're saying, hey, this is a snapshot of what's going on right now. This is what it looks like. You're definitely qualified for this area because of your scoring, but let me talk to you more about it. You can ask them questions based on how they answered. And that's true for pretty much any assessment. Even when I do premarital counseling, the premarital assessments that I give, I can ask them questions about some of the answers that they give. You know, the same is true for pretty much every assessment I give. I can look at their answers and say, hey, you answered this question this way. Can you tell me more about that, or something like that? That just kind of gives you a little more feel of what's going on. You never want to just say, well, you definitely have, you're definitely messed up. You're definitely, you don't want to, you want to go at it from a standpoint of, hey, some people really want to know what's going on, but you don't want to just bang them over the head with it. Plus, this isn't about like even if someone with bipolar disorder, like I'm working with a young man that has bipolar 2 disorder, he has bipolar 2 disorder. He is not bipolar 2 disorder. That's something that he has. That's not who he is. So when you're communicating results, you want to make sure you communicate that to people. This is not all that they are. This is something that they're struggling with, if that makes sense. So when you communicate results, it's really important that you kind of do it that way. There's very little research on how to communicate results, which is kind of interesting because that's like a third of what we do. We give it to them, we score it, and we communicate the results. But there's very little about that out there. Kind of talked about some of this. Um, there's a couple of things. I think I got an exercise we're going to do with this. I want to stop sharing for a second because I kind of want to know. When we talk about communicating, we can look at communicating results with adults in one way and communicating results with, let's say, teenagers or adolescents in one way, and then communicating with kids in another way. When we're communicating with kids, that means we're communicating with parents. Like if we give results, like if we're at school and we're giving results of testing that's done at school, you can do it with their kid, with the student, but in essence, you're doing it with the parents. That's what you're doing. Fast forward to an adult, you're not obviously doing it with their parents, you're doing it with an adult. But you could be communicating results with an individual and maybe their spouse is there too. That could happen in certain instances. Communicating with teenagers, you're also communicating with parents. The traditional cutoff there is, 18 years of age or older is kind of a black and white in terms of communication. Anything under 18, when you're communicating with their parents, whatever the results are, which means you get their consent. We're going to talk about a lot of the consent stuff as we move along here. You definitely get consent for testing with kids. Anyone under 18, you're getting consent from their parents. You don't just jump in and say, hey, we're going to do this. Does that make sense? I'm kind of hoping that's common sense. Sometimes it's not. That's why we say it. That's also why you take an ethics class. If you're going into school counseling, you'll take a school counseling ethics. If you're going to LPC or LMFT, you'll take a counseling ethics class. You'll talk about all these things I just mentioned. You'll talk about all those things in that class. And then if you see me again for practicum 2, I'll talk about them all again because we bring them all back up, because then you're doing actual counseling and some of these things actually start happening in real life. So let me take a step back for a second. What do you guys think? And I'm not looking for any one person to talk. I'm looking for anybody, what you think. When it comes to the difference between communicating with the results, and communicating with parents, communicating with a kid, or communicating with an adolescent, what would be some things you would think about when it comes to communicating? How would you do it differently or the same? What would that look like? What do you think?
You could speak in child-friendly languages,
Yep.
using child-friendly terminology. You can, for a child, you could go into, I don't know, some kind of play mode or whatever, if you're trying to get specific information from them.
Right.
Of course, you gotta win their trust.
That's
so
right.
you can get them to open up.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's super important. Especially with, when you're talking about kids, it's kind of an interesting, thing because, which is the next thing we're going to talk about is kind of interviewing, what that looks like with kids, because there's some specific things we can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
My question would be, if you're going to communicate results with an adult about, hey, we've given you this depression inventory, and it seems like you have moderate depression that's probably clinical. How would you do that? How would you communicate that to them? What would that look like?
Would we follow up maybe after explaining it and saying, hey, here's what this assessment says. What does that make you think when I say that? What comes to your mind?
Right. Yep. So kind of gauge where they're coming from and what they're feeling, what they're thinking. It's kind of collaborative, right? In that way. That's good. Yep.
I think my first instinct would be to normalize whatever's happening. I know when people have delivered results to me, it's been really helpful to quell the thought in my mind that like I'm crazy or weird or something's wrong, you know, but
Yep.
people have done a good job when they've delivered it, like you said, very assertively, like, hey, this isn't
Yep.
a scary thing, or it is a scary thing, but this is very normal. And here's how people, you know, normally might react or think.
Right.
And so kind of almost like walking 2 steps ahead of me in my thoughts. So I would want to do that for someone else if I was giving them those results.
Yeah, good. Normalizing is a counselor superpower. You need to not forget that. It's very important. Anybody else?
I would think
Yeah.
being just really patient and being making sure they have an opportunity to ask questions, give them honest answers to those questions, and just kind of be patient with them as they are processing.
Yeah, you definitely being patient and giving time, like enough time in a session, which sometimes can be challenging because there are clients that want to get better like fast, and they might see that session as like a waste of time because you're doing that when it's really not. And so that you can sometimes feel pressure in that way. But it's really just to try to help you understand some of the things that are going on. So that time and space is really important, and letting them ask questions is super important too. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a
Beth,
question.
Oh, go ahead.
yeah.
I'm sorry. I have a question regarding how would you let a patient know that has a significant mental disorder, like a schizophrenia or something like that?
Yeah. So most of the time, my personal experience, I've not dealt with that because I don't typically work with that level of mental health disorder. At the same time, the same general techniques would apply to be as direct and assertive as you can, but also normalize. But also remember that sometimes someone might have been struggling with something for years, and then all of a sudden they understand why. And it might make them feel better just understanding why. Now, that doesn't mean that they're okay with what you're telling them necessarily. But something like schizophrenia in and of itself is a really specific mental disorder that actually is kind of hard to talk about because of the symptoms of schizophrenia. But the same is true for like bipolar disorder, is very similar to that. It's really hard to talk about because of some of the symptoms. I've had good conversations with people after they've been diagnosed with some of those, especially bipolar disorder, like after they've been diagnosed with that, and they've maybe been given a couple, 2 or 3, 4 months to like let that kind of set in, that that's what it is. Sometimes the more therapeutic conversations happen then after they've let something, they can process it, let it sit in a little bit, and then you can kind of come back to it and talk about it. And again, you're normalizing that, hey, what you're feeling is normal, and you don't have to go through this alone. That's kind of why you want to talk about support. You talk about support systems or what's available to them, how you can help them, that kind of thing. That's also super important. When you start talking about things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, those are things that, to me, those are actually now becoming kind of specialties of people. They work specifically with those populations. That's something you kind of want to know and have in your back pocket and go, hey, I'm probably, like, for me, if I came across those clientele, I would want to refer them to people that I know work with them because they know how to work with them. So that's important to me. The other thing about that is that whenever you're, now that doesn't mean some of you guys might not want to work with those clients. Anyone, you can. That's just a really specific set of clients.
What do you say when you notice those characteristics? Do you touch on them at all, or just refer them out?
So
to
what
say,
I've done, what I've done in the past is say, it seems like we're talking about XYZ thing. It seems like things are going a little bit better, but there seems to be something that I feel like I'm missing. I kind of like put it on myself and say, I'm not sure if I'm catching it all. So let's get you, if you don't mind, would you be willing to do some further testing or assessment to see, let's figure out what's going on. I really want to figure out what's going on. And if I am missing something, I kind of want to know that. So I kind of just make it, hey, this is not about me, but like I'm having trouble, because I am, like, I'm being honest, I'm having trouble understanding what's happening. I'm having trouble understanding why things haven't progressed. Like we're 8, 9, 10 months in and we're still circling back to these same things. I must have missed something. Something's going on my end. Let's try to figure out if I've missed something. That's what I would do. And sometimes I might have had that conversation multiple times before like the guy I was talking about, the 21-year-old, he's 22 now. This took months, probably 4 or 5 months of me kind of talking about it over and over for him to finally say, yeah, you know what, let's get this figured out. And actually it's been really helpful. He figured out some things that he didn't know, and that's actually helped our therapy a lot. So that's what I would do, but everyone kind of figures out, kind of your own way to figure those things out. Okay. I want to show you guys one more thing because I feel like we talked about this, but I cannot remember. And I apologize when I go from class to class and from semester to semester. Did we talk about this initial intake interview process? I feel like we did. I just want to make sure. Some people
We
are saying
did, and
yes, some
you
people are saying
interviewed
no.
Wendy.
Okay. So these are the slides that go with some of those things, in terms of like finding out what the problems are, setting goals, that kind of thing. So we talked about structured, unstructured, semi-structured interviews. I think I talked about all this.
Mhm.
Did I talk? I can't remember. This is the one I want to land on for a second. I want to talk about this one specifically, interviewing kids. Because when you talk about interviewing children, it's a lot different than obviously interviewing adults. So I think a couple of people brought some of these things up before, like getting a rapport and being familiar. I would say this is true of teenagers as well. Okay. Obviously adjusting questions to fit them developmentally. You're trying to be warm and genuine. You can also give reasons for why you're asking questions, like giving them some, brief explanation about why. Talking about what's confidential and what's not. That's important. Some things, and we're going to actually talk about different diagnostic ways to interview kids the last class, but there's some structured ways that you can do things that are developmentally appropriate, like using props or games or toys. A lot of people use, like in the play therapy world, like puppets and sand tray, things like that. Art, some sculpting, family sculpting can be useful. Using a lot of different types of questions. If you're observing something, like if you're observing behavior, 2 of the ladies that I work with actually do school visits where they'll go and observe a classroom, let's say. And I've worked with other folks that actually did home visits where they would observe, kids or families at home, not to disrupt what was happening. You just watch it, you're observing it, and you kind of make notes of it, and you're trying to understand the interaction and what those patterns are and what that looks like. That's all part of the assessment process. You're trying to get kind of a holistic view. I've got some, again, the 2 ladies I work with, when they work with kids, they do a fairly extensive parental questionnaires as well, not just with the kids, but with the parents, and ask them questions and talk specifically about home life, roles, rules, guidelines, boundaries, different areas like that with the kids. Obviously, the parents, when they bring kids, they kind of say, hey, here's some things that are happening. I don't understand these things, or maybe they're trying to get help with certain behaviors, that kind of thing. Now, I happen to work with all therapists that are also systems theory folks. So we kind of look at things, not just, okay, it's just this one kid. There's also the system of the parents and the system of the family, and there's siblings involved, and there's school involved, and maybe there's church involved. Sometimes there's grandparents involved, and all those systems matter. So you kind of want to gather information about all those things too. There are, in your book, there are several different checklists available, like examples of checklists, like pretty standard informal checklists that I think are super helpful. I use a certain type of checklist for my intake interview or my intake packet that people fill out. Just kind of, you can check off things that apply to you. You can be specific with these checklists. You can have specific ones just for adolescents, or just for couples or families. You can make them as general or as broad as you want, or as specific as you want. You can use rating scales. Rating scales would be like a Likert scale of like a 1 to 5. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the less, 5 being the most. How bad is this problem, or whatever you're trying to talk about. When it comes to the scales, or asking scaling types of questions within the therapeutic process, you can use scaling questions with your clients almost anytime. Scaling questions can be really helpful because they will give you kind of like I said, like a snapshot in time of something. So if I work with a couple and I don't know, every couple wants to talk about communication, but if we talk about specific parts of communication, or if we talk about trust, let's say, if we're talking about intimacy, whatever the topic, I can say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I have no trust, I don't trust this person at all. 10 being I'm like, I trust them with my life, I trust them with everything. Where are you on that scale? I use 1 to 10 because 1 to 10 gives you a lot more freedom and leeway than 1 to 5. So mentally, psychologically, there's a little bit of it just seems better. And wherever they rank themselves, their spouse ranks themselves too. And we kind of look at it. And then from that scaling question, let's say that they both rank themselves 4 or 5, let's say. Well, that's pretty low. You could ask any kind of question. Then you could say, where would you like for it to be? Or you could say, what would make it not be a 3? What makes it not be a 1? What makes it, has it ever been an 8? What was going on then? You can use that scale as an assessment and then use it to say, hey, how could it, in essence, what would it look like if it's better? How would you do that? And that also lets you know, hey, when they're doing these things, it seems to be they're more trusting of each other, or they have more intimacy, let's say, and maybe their communication's better. I don't know. Does that make sense? Hopefully you can use that kind of scaling. You can do that pretty much anytime. Scaling questions are a big part of solution-focused therapy, but that scaling questions have been around for a long time. I do that a lot I do it with pretty much any clients that I have, adolescents, adults, couples, individuals. I do want to talk about, oh man, I'm always going to run out of time. Let me just stop there for a second. Let me take a step back. You guys have any questions about any? I feel like I'm talking really fast because I know I'm trying to kind of get through some information. Do you guys have any questions about anything that we're talking about right now? And it could be about anything or anything we have talked about. Any questions?
For the most part, those the intake forms, I mean, they're forms, right? They're not questions you're asking during the session, or do you find it's half and half, or?
Yeah, you can do either one. If you're a more formal intake person, you could have a list of questions you're going to ask people when they're in front of you, and you're kind of checking them off the list and you're writing notes as you go. If you're more informal, it would be more like what Wendy and I did last week. It was more kind of a conversation, but I still had some things that I was doing and asking that I normally do. If you're totally informal and you're just having a conversation, you can do that too, where there's not really like, it's no agenda. They can talk about anything they want and you just kind of ask questions based on that. You can do that too. It really kind of depends on what your style is or what you would like for your style to be. It also depends on what kind of information that you're trying to get. The one time that you need to be really specific is when you're talking about, and I'm going to bring this up. When we're talking about suicide, every type of intake you give a client should have some question about suicidal thought, either in the past or present. Every intake should have that. Anytime that you have a client, even if they're not a client yet, but you read their intake paperwork or electronic paperwork and they've marked, hey, I've had suicidal thoughts. Even if they say, they're 40 and this happened when they were 16. That is always something you want to ask about. And when you ask about suicide or suicidal ideation or thought, you want to be very specific and you want to be very direct. When was the last time you had suicidal thoughts? When was the last time you thought about suicide? When was the last time that you were thinking about this at all? Now, sometimes they might say, if they said, it really was when I was 16, I haven't had any suicidal thoughts since I was in high school and now they're 40, that's okay. But you need to ask. If someone has currently had them or had them within the past, within the past year especially, you're going to then ask more questions. You can use the Likert scale I just described, scale of 1 to 10. 1 is I have thought about suicide, but I haven't thought about it in days. I have no plan to go and kill myself right now. To 10, I'm walking out the door, I have a gun, or I'm going to drive my car into a bridge, or X, Y. The more lethal, the more serious you're going to take it for sure. If someone says, I'm like a 2 right now, okay, and you might even say, I'm going to probably ask you about this again, because that's very serious. And I want you to know that I want to make sure that you're okay. And mainly because you want them to know that they're not alone if they're thinking about it. If someone starts answering 6, 7, 8, you're getting other people involved. You're doing some other things specifically to make sure that they're safe. Suicide is something you immediately take serious, no matter even if you're working with a teenager. I've worked with teenagers before that have said, I'm a 7 or an 8. I immediately get the parents involved, bring them in. And the parents maybe sometimes are like, they said this before, I've heard this before. That's okay. This is very important. I think you need to drop what you're doing. We need to get them to the emergency room, or we need to get them somewhere safe. There's multiple types of safety types of planning you can do with people. Everything from like, if you have this thought and you're not with me, who can you call, list them out, and you kind of have a contract. to start listing, what things, but I know, they might say, but I know my family would miss me. Well, why would they miss you? And you're starting to build hope, because a lot of times suicidal thought coincides with and is correlated with loss of hope. As people lose hope, the suicidal thought might begin to rise. And so that's something you need to be, my point is, anytime suicidal thought comes up, that's something you immediately take very seriously. And that's something you need to have in all your paperwork 100% of the time. Because if that's something you need to assess for, you need to know to assess for it. That's super important. Ken's asking a really good question here. Can you let them leave the office if they are currently thinking? No. I mean, if someone jumps up and runs out, like, you can't physically tackle people, but you can't, you want to, I will not let someone leave if they're having suicidal thoughts and they're like in that 7 to 10. That's, to me, even 6 is really something I want to be cognizant of, and I will have someone come there. I've had family members, I've had spouses come and take them immediately to the emergency room. If someone is suicidal, and let me just say this, even if this is someone and this is just, you're randomly out and you're having to hear this, or someone calls you or something, having someone go to the emergency room is not what people want to do, but that's what they are there to keep people safe, period. That's their number one job. If someone is having significant suicidal thought and they have a plan, which means a plan is, I have a gun, or I'm going to drive my car off a bridge. I'm going to jump off this building. The more lethal the plan, the more significant the plan. Okay. I'm going to take 5 Advil and go to sleep. That's not a lethal plan. Now there's something else going on we need to talk about. I'm going to take 20 of these sleeping pills. That's a lethal plan. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So the first thing is you're gauging, where am I on the spectrum? The second thing is, do you have a plan? Third thing is this plan lethal? And how lethal is it? If someone has a lethal plan and let's say they call you on the phone even, you immediately want them going to an emergency room. That's what you need to get them to. That's who takes care of them.
What happens at the emergency room if you take them?
Yeah, so depends on the emergency room. But they would immediately do is they would probably set you in get you in a bed. But they all hospitals have mental health staff on call, and they would come down and they would basically do an assessment, kind of like what we would do. They would do a lot more formally. And if they judge that you need to be maybe going to intensive outpatient or maybe intensive care somewhere, they would actually refer you to that place, depending on what was going on. But mainly they want to make sure that you stay safe with yourself and with others. That's really the key there. It kind of depends on the emergency room. But that's what they're designed for, is to help people stay safe.
So if you've done all those things and taken every measure to ensure that you have, I guess, helped them be safe in a sense, if they told you they wanted to commit suicide and they go out and commit suicide anyway, would you be liable as a counselor?
Liability is something that's hard to prove. Mm-hmm. It's actually easier to get in trouble for, well, this is crazy. Y'all are going to learn about this in ethics. You have no duty to warn necessarily. If someone's homicidal, you have no duty to warn. If someone's suicidal, it's not your fault that they committed suicide. But when your notes, you want to be really meticulous. Here's what happened. I did this and this and this, and I have a timeline. These things happen, and then we got these people involved, and then these people did this. 71% of counselors will come into or work with folks that have attempted suicide.
Mhm.
And about 28% of them will have a client that has committed suicide. So it does happen. It is something that is part of some of the folks that we work with. And so when you have a suicidal client, when you do your notes, you want to be real specific on what you did and said and how you did it and said it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the cause of their suicide. That's really difficult to prove,
Mhm.
because that's a legal, now you're talking about it like a legal thing. So ethically, we have ethics, right? And then
Mhm.
there's laws. Ethics are what govern us as a body. Laws are what governs us as a society. We're going to talk about that specifically. Not in the next class, but the next. We'll talk about that. And I think you guys have already read the ethics chapter. I think they flip-flopped the chapters on me. They got that at the front now. We talk a lot about that specifically. There was something else I was going to say about that, and now I forgot. Let's talk about alcohol and substance abuse. If you have a client that comes to a session intoxicated, you can't have a session with someone that's intoxicated, right? That's actually in the code, ethically speaking. However, the question would always be, what do you do with that person? Because I had a client one time that showed up, and this was like 8 o'clock at night, and showed up, and I could smell alcohol immediately. As soon as he sat down, I was like, dude, what, you're drunk. He's like, I only had 13 beers. I was like, well, yeah, that's probably over the limit there. We can't meet. And did you drive here? Yeah, I just drove. I'm like, why'd you drive here? I can't let you leave. Now, him being adult, he got up and walked out. I can't physically restrain him. He got up and walked out, but I was on the campus of Texas Tech, and immediately called the campus authorities and said, hey, this guy left. He's intoxicated. Tried to stop him. This particular guy just went on foot. Unfortunately, 10 minutes later, they called me back and said, hey, it was this guy wearing a yellow backpack. And I'm like, no, they picked up some poor kid wearing a yellow backpack, and it wasn't my client. I was like, no, that's not him. But if you have clients that come in that are intoxicated, you can't have a session with them, because that should be common sense, but kind of like if you're a counselor and you're intoxicated, you shouldn't have sessions with people. That should be common sense too, although that actually happens. And so those are things that are important. When we get to the place of assessing for substance or alcohol usage, there are assessments for those. We're going to talk about some of those specifically that you can give with your master's degree. You can give some of those assessments to people. Now, whether you can get them to take it or not, that's part of the addiction. That's part of the problem with addiction. Denial is one of the largest roadblocks to addiction treatment. And so, we're gonna talk about some of those more specifically as we go. I'm gonna try to actually put some of those up so you guys can see them. You guys can look some of those up too. Like the SASSI, SASSI is one. It's a big one. The MAST, MAST is a big one that's used in the addiction world. There's some other ones too. Those are some of the bigger ones. Some of you guys might be doing those with your chart and paper. Those are the kind of the big areas in terms of assessments. The next time we we talked, our next class, we're going to jump into intelligence, personality, aptitude kinds of testing. We're going to talk about those. The class after that, we're going to talk specifically about marriage and family. And then our last class, we'll talk about ethics. And I'm going to give you a couple of, I've got a couple of art type of assessments I'm going to actually have you guys do. We'll do those too. As you read through the book, there might be some assessments that like jump out at you like, hey, this seems interesting. Don't hesitate to, learn more about those. The book has a ton of assessments in it and talks about a lot of them. I think the book does a good job of bringing up a lot, especially current ones. They're used by lots of people. But those are some of the things that we'll head towards as we meet, not next week, but the next. So having said all that, what are some questions that you guys might have, comments? What can I help you with?
This is just something I've been curious about, but in talking about people being certified to do specific types of assessments, I'm in the research class with Dr. Tinius right now. We had to take the Myers-Briggs,
Yep.
but Dr. Hubbard had to send us that email link. She didn't send it. Is that because, is he one of the few people at the school certified? Did it have to come through him, or is there a different reason that he was the one who sent it, even though he's not the professor in that class?
He's the one in charge of that study, that research study at Amberton. So that's why you got it from him, because he has a team that takes those results and plugs them in. So each of you guys have a learning style. That's why we're using that information. However, you can't give the Myers-Briggs unless you're certified to give the Myers-Briggs. So that part's true. Even as a master's student, you would still need to have certification to give the Myers-Briggs, which you can do. I think it's like $3,000 or $4,000, maybe $2,000 to get certified. I can't remember. Most of the certifications are fairly expensive, but if that's something you really like, it can be really helpful in your therapy. It's super usable. So that's a good question. Probably it's just because he's the one in charge of the research. She could have sent the link too, because she's not actually giving the assessment. So,
Yeah, that's what I was curious about, because I did take it online, so I wondered
yep.
how that worked.
Yeah, and what you took is a version that we use at Amberton for what's called the QEP. So we're actually looking at how students learn, and then the professors take it and we look at our teaching style and y'all's learning style, and that way we can try to join those up a little bit, be a little more specific in how we do things. So that's what that's for. That's a good question. There are levels of assessments that you can give. The top levels are more the psychiatric, like learning disorders, some childhood neurological disorders. We wouldn't be able to give. You'd have to have a psychological doctorate. You have to go to have a doctorate in psychology to give. If you have a doctorate in psychology, basically you can give pretty much any mental health assessment, but you guys will be able to do 70% of the assessments with your master's degree. The ones that you can't, you can get further training in to do, but we don't do that here at Amberton. Most of that training comes in a doctoral program. That's why there's levels to it. Things like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, certain cognitive disorders, those things you guys as master students wouldn't be able to do, but a psychologist can. But anything like depression, anxiety, any like marital assessments, family things for kids, certain types of things for kids you can do. There's the one Pandora's box is there's a little gray area in the school testing realm. Some school counselors might venture into worlds that they might probably shouldn't in terms of assessment, but some of them do. As diagnosticians, they have some training in certain things. So that's a whole other ball of wax. And as you go, if you're in school counseling, as you go through that program, you'll learn more specifically about those things too. Anybody else have any questions or anything that I can help you with?
Dr. Bedard, I was curious on when we actually take our like certification exam, will we need to know like some of the things about like the different names of IQ tests and the different types of assessments, or are those types of things that we need to?
You'll just need to know some general information about assessments. I don't think they ask you about specific ones other than maybe they might ask like a score means XYZ kind of thing, but I don't think they're going to dive into a lot of specifics about those specifically. I don't think but you'll have some questions on assessments like reliability, validity, what's important about assessment, how would you do it, that kind of thing. There'll be some, but if you guys, the study material that you get will give you tons of information, pretty much probably more than you need to know for the exam. You'll have plenty, there'll be plenty in there to help out with that.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering, I was been kind of overwhelmed reading.
It's
you know,
overwhelming.
all the
Yeah.
different things, and so I was-
We overwhelm you on purpose in every class because it's like you open your mouth, we open the fire hydrant. Every class is like that, because it's 10 weeks. This class and lifespan class is like tons of information all at once, and counseling theories or career counseling theories. It's like just all at you at once. But yeah, you won't be tested on every little specific thing.
So then is there a study tool that you recommend? Like, because I know people have mentioned the Purple Book.
That's the best one.
Okay, because I know I think there actually might be an assessments section in that where it
Yep.
kind of goes over like the most important takeaways for assessments as with other
Yep.
topics.
Mhm.
So that's the one that you recommend the most.
Yeah, and there's some laminated sheets. I have to look it up. There's some laminated study guide sheets too. They're really good. I think they're more with the theories.
Yeah, you can find those on Amazon, and they're I actually just bought them, and they're really cool.
Yeah, they're really good. And they're good for classes, I think. I think they're
Yeah.
good for the class. But yeah, the purple study guide book is the best. As far as I know, it's the best one.
Okay.
And if you're in an MFT track, there's a study guide for the MFT as well that's really good. So, and I actually know two of the kind of trainers for the MFT exam. I went to school with them. They were my professors that use that book, and they have a really good training for that exam as well. There's LPC training, NCE exam training classes as well. You just kind of have to find them. We used to do them at Amberton, but they haven't done that in a long time. You guys how far away are y'all from doing the exam? I'm just curious. I can't remember where people are.
You take it after you graduate now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I guess November-ish, maybe. Can you take it right after you graduate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. You graduate, you get your transcript, you apply for this exam, you pay the money for the exam, you get a place to go, you go take it, get the results, apply for your intern license, associate license, off you go. It sounds easy. I wish it was that easy. There's some hoops to jump through in there. Anybody else?
What is the name of the purple book?
What is that called? I just
I
know
think
as a purple book.
it's by Rosenthal. I think it's his name.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Rosenthal.
You can
Mhm.
actually buy I think you can buy a physical book, and then you can also possibly buy like the ebook. So I think there's like different formats for it. I'm not positive. And then there might even be an audio version that goes with it. I can't really remember.
Yeah, there might be.
But I know that it's I call it the purple book because that's just the easiest way to remember it.
That's what everybody calls it because it's purple.
Yeah, I looked it up and it's the Encyclopedia of Counseling.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's a long title.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's only part of the long title, but yeah.
Yeah, but if anyone
Encyclopedia.
sees the purple book, that's the one.
That's it.
Yeah, because the subtitle is The Authentic Purple Book.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you ever take Springer, she'll recommend doing the purple book as you take the classes at Amberton because it kind of goes with them.
Yep.
So like there's a section on multicultural, there's a section on career. And so I don't know if it's best to do it like right after you finish all the classes as you get
Mhm.
closer to test or as you go. I don't know. I guess it's
I did
personal.
I did all my study right before. I studied for a week
A
and then
week.
took the exam.
Oh, what was
Is
the
that
name of the
only
book?
for LPC
or is for also school counseling?
That the school counseling separate. That's a totally different exam, test, everything. Everything's different. So this one we're talking about now is LPC. Anybody else? All right. Let's have a good rest of the week, people. And let's keep our heads and let's all be cool. Thursday is going to happen. We're going to get past Wednesday and Thursday is going to be a day. The sun's going to come up and we're still going to have to take an exam this weekend. Everybody's going to be all right.
When does the exam close?
Wednesday, the 20th. Actually, at 11 p.m. Wednesday actually is when it closes.
And it's open book, right?
Open everything.
And you only have a 4-hour window. Even if you stop the test, you have to finish it within 4 hours, right?
Yes,
Okay. So you can't log out and go back the next day.
you can.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, it stops the time when you log out.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. You have 4 hours total, but if you log out, it stops the time and you get back in, the time starts again.
Perfect.
I don't think it's going to take you 4 hours.
I think if you do your study guide, you won't probably need to pause it,
I'm telling you,
given
if you do
past
that-
experiences in other classes.
That's right. If you do the study guide, you're going to be good. I'm telling you. Now, y'all don't call your classmates and ask them for answers. Don't go down that road. All right. Hey, thanks for coming, guys. And I'll put this up probably tomorrow. You can get it. Oh, next week we won't meet. And then the next week we will.
So everybody can say happy birthday to me.
Oh, happy birthday.
Monday is my birthday on the
Oh, we
18th.
can have cake.
Happy
Everybody
birthday.
will have cake.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, we're gonna have cake.
59.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Good. You look good. Happy birthday.
Thank you kindly. 58. My husband reminded me.
Hey, don't age
Isn't that
yourself.
something? Maybe he's gonna throw me a party.
Maybe.
You
Ooh.
don't know. You
The
never know.
weekend.
Thank you.
Hey guys, we'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right.
Bye,
Have a
thank
good week.
you.
Bye.